I was wiping down the marble island in my penthouse kitchen when my phone buzzed, an unexpected FaceTime request from my sister, Elaine. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, my niece, Madison, had stood in my old apartment and scrunched her nose at my cheap kitchen like she'd stepped into a thrift store science project. Now, as the morning sun spilled through my floor-to-ceiling windows and warmed the soft silk of my blouse, I stared at her name flashing across the screen. My reflection glowed back at me from the glass, calm, composed, but my stomach tightened all the same. Family had a way of stirring ghosts I preferred kept in locked drawers. I hesitated. The espresso machine behind me hummed softly, filling the air with the familiar smell of dark roast, my little ritual before diving into the whirlwind of another high-pressure business day. I had a meeting in an hour, my planner was full, my hair was already curled and set. I didn't have time for chaos wrapped in a smile. But something about the timing, about Madison calling now, sent a prickle down my spine. People only reach out suddenly when they want one of two things, forgiveness or favors. With a slow breath, I accepted the call. Madison's face appeared, bright and shaky, framed by what looked like the entry hall of a very expensive home. "Aunt Lily," she said, voice trembling. We need to talk. It's about the house." And just like that, the past I'd walked away from came knocking again. I wasn't always the woman with a skyline view and a calendar full of power meetings. Back then, I was just Lily Morgan, 23, exhausted, and living in a cramped Cincinnati rental with peeling wallpaper and a fridge that rattled louder than my confidence. It was Thanksgiving the year everything cracked open. Elaine had insisted I come to her new house, her first big house, because family should be together. I arrived with my homemade sweet potato casserole, still warm under foil, my hands trembling as I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, the judgment, the comparison, the silent checklist of everything I wasn't. Elaine's husband gave me a brief nod, barely masking the way his eyes scanned my thrift store coat. And then there was Madison, 12 years old, and already fluent in cruelty. She tugged at my sleeve and pulled me toward the kitchen. "Look, Mom," she shouted, flipping open one of their gleaming cabinets. "Aunt Lily doesn't have anything like this. Hers is so cheap." The room erupted into polite, uncomfortable laughter, the kind that stings worse than open insults. I swallowed hard. The casserole dish in my hands felt suddenly heavier. "Oh, honey, be nice," Elaine murmured, but she didn't look at Madison. She looked at me, and there was no apology in her eyes. Just pity wrapped in condescension. I remember the heat rising in my throat, the metallic taste of humiliation, my fingers gripping the foil until it wrinkled. "Maybe Lily just doesn't know how to manage money yet," Elaine added softly, like she was comforting a child who had fallen behind. That did it. My breath hitched, and I excused myself to the backyard. The cold November air slapped my cheeks, but it couldn't numb the ache inside. I leaned against the wooden railing and let my hands shake freely. That's when I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. It was my grandmother, Grace, 80 years old, wrapped in a lavender scarf, eyes bright with that steady, uncomplicated love only grandmothers seem to master. "Don't you let them define you, Lily," she whispered. "You have a fire in you. You always have." She pressed something into my hand, a tiny brass key attached to a locket I'd never seen her wear. "This," she said, "opens the box in my attic. Inside is everything you need to start fresh. Promise me you won't stay small just because they can't see your size." Her voice cracked, and so did something inside me. That night, after dinner ended and the house quieted, I drove to her place. I climbed into the dusty attic, found the old cedar box, and unlocked it with trembling fingers. Inside lay the seed of the life I hadn't yet dared to imagine. And I knew I was done being the family's quiet punching bag. I was done playing small. Inside my grandmother's cedar box was something so simple, yet so life-altering. It took me minutes just to breathe normally again. A folder labeled for Lily, in her careful handwriting. Inside, A cashier's check for $18,000, a handwritten letter, and a business card belonging to a woman named Margaret Steele, a real estate investor in Chicago. My grandmother's note was short but powerful. This is your start. Margaret owes me a favor. Call her and build the life you deserve. I sat in that dusty attic, surrounded by boxes of forgotten Christmas decorations and old photo albums, crying quietly into my sleeves. No one had ever invested in me, not like this. Not with belief. 2 weeks later, with my beat-up Toyota packed with everything I owned, I drove 8 hours north to Chicago. The whole way there, my stomach twisted with fear. What if I failed? What if everyone had been right about me? But fear didn't get to drive. Not anymore. Margaret Steele was nothing like I expected. She was in her late 50s, tall, sharp-eyed, wearing a crisp navy blazer and a silver bob that suggested both elegance and efficiency. She listened as I explained who I was, why I came, what I wanted. And then she nodded once, decisively. "You're hungry," she said. "Hungry people learn fast. I can work with that." It was the first real break I'd ever been given. I started as her assistant, answering calls, organizing paperwork, shadowing her during property inspections. But Margaret didn't believe in keeping ambitious women small. Within months, she was giving me small renovation budgets to manage. Then entire duplex flips. The work was grueling, physically, mentally, emotionally. I spent nights on cold floors measuring spaces, comparing materials, learning to argue with contractors twice my size who didn't take a young woman seriously. I spent days studying permits, zoning laws, interior design trends, and mortgage rates. Some nights I sat on the edge of my tiny studio apartment, paint stains on my jeans, sore muscles pulsing, hands trembling as I questioned whether I had made a colossal mistake. But every time doubt crept in, I opened my grandmother's letter again. People who underestimate you will witness your rise. Keep going. And I did. My first real win came a year later, a small 2-bedroom I renovated and staged myself. It sold above asking. Not by much, but enough to flip the switch in my mind. I can do this. I can build something real. From there, momentum became my best friend. 1 project turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. 10 turned into a portfolio big enough that my name started circulating in Chicago investor circles. But I never posted about it. Never mentioned it in family group chats. Never corrected Elaine when she made snide comments about me. Probably struggling, but too proud to admit it. Let them assume. Let them believe their version. Silence was my shield, and strangely my power. Years passed, and my life transformed. I built a discreet empire under a modest online presence. I lived comfortably, traveled occasionally, and worked harder than anyone I knew. But I kept everything close to my chest. Until one day, Margaret retired and handed me the keys. Not literal ones, but the entire operation. "Take it," she told me, placing her hand over mine. "You've earned every inch of this." And just like that, I became the woman no one in my family imagined I could ever be. The woman they were about to meet. Far sooner than they expected. When Madison's trembling voice said, "It's about the house," I felt my pulse slow instead of race. Years of negotiations, multi-million-dollar deals, and boardroom standoffs had a way of rewiring a woman's instincts. Panic wasn't my language anymore. Precision was. "Whose house?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Ours," she whispered. "Mom said you should come." Of course she did. An hour later, I pulled into the circular driveway of Elaine's mansion, a sprawling, stone-fronted testament to financial recklessness disguised as success. The kind of place people bought to feel rich, not because they were. I stepped out of my car, heels clicking against the polished stone like punctuation marks on a sentence I'd waited years to deliver. The front door swung open and there they were, Elaine, pale and tight-lipped, and Madison, her mascara smudged like she'd been crying for hours. "Aunt Lily," Madison said, voice small now. Not mocking, not superior, just scared. I walked past them into the grand foyer, inhaling the scent of citrus cleaner barely masking something deeper. Panic. Papers lay scattered across the entry table. Foreclosure warnings, overdue statements, a highlighted section about potential auction dates. Wow. I murmured lightly, running my fingers along the curved banister. You've redecorated. Elaine flinched. Lily, this isn't the time. It seems exactly like the time, I countered, stepping calmly into the sunlit living room. It was as extravagant as ever. Oversized fireplace, ivory couches, abstract art that probably cost 3 times more than it should have. Except now the illusion cracked at the edges. Dust on shelves. Wilting plants. A lingering sense of financial freefall. I turned to face them, folding my arms. So, tell me what you need. Elaine's composure finally broke. We didn't know things would get this bad, she said, voice trembling. The business deals, the interest, the payments. And you want me to cover it? I asked softly. She didn't answer, but the silence did. I nodded slowly, letting the moment stretch, letting them feel the quiet weight of everything they didn't know about me. Then I opened my handbag, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the glass coffee table. Elaine frowned. What's that? Proof, I said simply, that this house isn't yours. Madison blinked. What do you mean? We bought it. I tilted my head, savoring the slow unraveling of truth. You bought it with a predatory loan. And when the bank quietly resold the debt last year, it went to a private buyer. Elaine's face drained of color. A private buyer? Yes. I sat down, crossing my legs, perfectly composed as sunlight glinted off the title deed tucked inside the folder. I purchased your debt portfolio 18 months ago, I said, each word measured. The deed was transferred to my company's trust shortly after. Madison's lips parted. You own our house? I looked right at her, remembering the scrunched nose, the whispered insult. Cheap kitchen. Yes, sweetheart. I've owned it for over a year. They stared at me like I'd just spoken in another language. And maybe I had, because the woman standing before them wasn't the Lily they remembered. Not the insecure girl with the thrift store coat. Not the woman whose kitchen they mocked. I was the quiet storm they never saw coming. I don't understand, Elaine whispered. How could you afford this? I glanced around the mansion, then back at her. While you were buying status, I said. I was building an empire. Madison sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Elaine swayed like she might faint. What are you going to do? She finally asked. I stepped closer, my heels silent against the plush rug. That depends, I said softly, on whether you're ready to hear the rest. They looked up at me, fearful, desperate, humbled. Good. Because the real reveal was still coming. And this time, I would speak without shrinking, without trembling, without apologizing. This time, they would learn exactly who I had become. Elaine steadied herself on the arm of the sofa, as if the truth had knocked the air out of her lungs. Madison looked up at me with wide, wet eyes, the same eyes that once rolled at my cheap life. Now they held something entirely different. Fear, yes, but also recognition. For the first time, they were seeing me clearly. I took a slow breath, letting the silence sit between us. Before I decide anything, I said, I need honesty. All of it. Elaine swallowed. We're 3 months behind. The bank won't refinance. The investors pulled out. The credit cards. I saw the reports. I cut in gently. But I want to hear you say it. She nodded, voice cracking. We're drowning, Lily. And I don't know what to do. There it was, the confession. The thing pride had kept her from admitting until her back was against a wall of her own making. I lowered myself into the chair opposite them. Okay, I said softly. I can help, but not without conditions. Madison's head jerked up. Conditions? Yes, I answered, meeting her gaze. Because helping you without changing anything would be a waste. And I don't do wasted effort anymore. I clasped my hands together, leaning slightly forward. Let's start with you, Madison. She stiffened. You're smart, I said. You have potential, but entitlement has buried it. Her cheeks reddened. My support comes with one requirement. You're enrolling in community college, starting next semester. Business, finance, trade skill, graphic design. I don't care what you choose.
But you will choose something.
And you will finish it. She blinked rapidly. And if I don't, you'll find yourself exactly where your arrogance has led you nowhere. She nodded slowly, wiping her cheek. Okay.
I'll
do it. I turned to Elaine next. She tensed even harder. You've spent years measuring everyone's worth by what they could afford, what they wore, what they drove. Her lips trembled. I know, she whispered. So here's your condition, therapy once a week. Not optional. You need help healing whatever made you so determined to tear people down. Especially me. She covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. I didn't know I was hurting you that much. But you did, I replied gently. And it left scars you never bothered to see. She nodded, shaking. I'll go. I promise. Finally, I reached into my folder and pulled out the deed, placing it on the table with a soft thud. Now for the house, I said. Both of them froze. I'm not throwing you out. A gasp escaped Madison. Elaine's shoulders sagged with relief. But, I added, and they snapped back to attention. You're not living here for free. I'll restructure the debt under my company. I'll reduce the interest. But you will make monthly payments, on time, every time. Miss 2, and the deal ends. Elaine nodded immediately.
Yes.
Anything. We can do that. One more thing, I said, standing. They looked up, bracing. You will treat me with respect. No more mocking, no more belittling, no more pretending you're above anyone. That version of our family is dead. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Madison whispered, We're sorry. And Elaine whispered, I'm so sorry. I believed them. Not fully, but enough for this moment. Good, I said gently. Because change starts now. And for the first time in our lives, the power between us finally felt balanced because I wasn't giving it away anymore. The following weeks unfolded quietly. No dramatic outbursts, no backhanded comments, no old habits creeping in like shadows under a closed door. It was strange at first, watching Elaine soften into accountability and Madison stumble into humility. Strange, but not unwelcome. Madison enrolled in community college sooner than I expected. She sent me a photo of her student ID, eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in her since she was little. Hope. I picked digital marketing, her message read. It feels like something I could be good at. I stared at that text a long time before responding. Proud of you. Keep going. Elaine started therapy on Wednesdays. She didn't give me details, she didn't have to. The change showed in the small things. The way she paused before speaking, the way she admitted when she didn't know something, the way she actually listened instead of waiting for her turn to judge. One afternoon, she invited me over for tea. Not a fancy gathering, not a presentation of curated perfection, just tea at the kitchen table, mismatched mugs, and vulnerability sitting between us. Lily, she said softly, tracing the rim of her cup, I used to think success was something you displayed. You taught me it's something you build. It was the closest thing to a real apology she'd ever offered, and it landed heavier than any insult she'd ever thrown. I'm learning too, I admitted. Forgiveness doesn't erase history, but it can shape what comes next. We sat in comfortable silence after that. A first. Later, as I drove home, the city lights blinking softly against the dusk, I reached into my handbag and pulled out the old brass key, the one my grandmother had given me in that attic so many years ago. I held it between my fingers, feeling the cool metal warm in my palm. That little key had opened more than a cedar box. It had opened a life, a future, a version of myself I never imagined I could grow into. When I got back to my penthouse, I placed the key on my windowsill, where the evening sun could catch it. The city stretched endlessly below, my city now, my work, my story carved into every success I had fought for. And in the quiet glow of sunset, I finally felt the fullness of everything, the hurt I survived, the strength I cultivated, the boundaries I built, the woman I became, because I refused to stay small. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, soft but unshakable. People who underestimate you will witness your eyes. I smiled, whispering into the stillness. They did. And with that, the story closed, not with revenge, but with something far more powerful. A woman standing exactly where she chose to be, strong, steady, and beautifully unshaken. Top of form.